our home forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes. Here our souls are often fearful of the pilgrim's lurking foe, but the Lord is our defender, and he tells us we may know. Yonder over the rolling river, where the shining mansions rise, soon will be our home forever, and the smile of the blessed giver gladdens all our longing eyes.
Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day you've given us and the opportunities that we have to meet together and to study your word. Father, we pray you open our minds and our hearts so that we can understand things in your word and apply them to our everyday lives and those around us, so that we can influence them to want to be part of your church and to be saved, Father. Thank you so much for Wayne and his scholarship, and thank you for the way he opens our minds. Pray you'll be with him today and be with us all as we go about learning this and as we travel afterwards. Give us of our sins in your Son's precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, see, if he'd have got parked about 5 minutes earlier, he would have been it. It's good to see you, Brother James. We got to pick on you a little. Okay, today we're talking about a subject that I think is one of the most misunderstood subjects in the Bible. We see the word and we use it probably 3 or 4 times every week in our conversation. But do we really understand what the word is? And so I want us to look this morning and see if we do or if we don't. And this is what the world, it sort of considers something like this as hospitality. And I know because I went on the internet and I looked for images of hospitality, and this is what I found. And so that is sort of the idea of what hospitality is. I'm going to save this slide right here for the very last. And so that should be part of my conclusion. I put it together after I got here, and now we'll go back to the beginning up here. We'll stop right there. Okay, now then, the definition of hospitality in the normal average dictionary. This is World Book Dictionary, and a whole bunch of us are familiar with that because we either grew up or we still have a set of those World Book encyclopedias. And there was always a dictionary, or sometimes a 2-volume dictionary that came with it. But it says generous reception and treatment of guests or strangers. And this is in volume 1, so I've got a 2-volume set, obviously, and it was on page 954 in volume 1. The Oxford Concise Dictionary, which I also have, says hospitality, friendly reception of guests or strangers in homes, and it comes from the Latin word hospitalitatem, a place where guests and strangers are entertained. And that's from the Latin English Dictionary, which I also have on page 727. So the modern dictionaries, most of them just sort of give just a general idea, sort of like with some other words that we look up, and when we look at the biblical meaning, it goes deeper than that. Other words from Latin, this Latin word, hospital. And did you know that a hospital originally wasn't a place where you took care of the sick? Now, you take care of them if they were there, but a hospital was a place where travelers would stop. How many of you remember Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales? There's, the hospital is mentioned in there. And people that would go on the pilgrimage, they'd go to Canterbury to see the memorial to Sir Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket, you may remember, was murdered. One of the kings of England, long before Henry VIII, he had Thomas A. Becket murdered. And so the people loved this man so much, they built a memorial there in Canterbury, and people would come from all over England to that memorial. And so there was one of these places that was built just to accommodate the travelers as they come in and go out.
On that same night, I thought I heard on the Natchez Trace, Lewis, when he is buried,
Yeah,
there's a house facility that was a rest area for the Trace people.
exactly. That's where Lewis was murdered there.
That's right.
And somebody broke the rules of hospitality there. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I've been to that place several times, and I use that for a different illustration about the Lord's Supper, because there's a monument there to Meriwether Lewis, and that monument, that helps us to remember the man and what he did, and that's what a memorial is. And like so with Thomas A. Becket, those people were going there and just honoring the man, because he was definitely a good moral person, and everybody apparently in England liked him except the king, who felt a little guilty maybe around him and had him murdered. But the word hospice, that also comes from that same word. And hospice then didn't mean what we've made it mean now. When we think of hospice today, we think of somebody who's at the very end of their life, and we call in these folks from hospice, and they come in and sort of take care of them until they pass away. And I'll never forget, and Brenda and I heard my mother ask this lady from hospice, when they told her that she had liver cancer, and of course liver cancer is always, I reckon it's always terminal. Was with my mother anyway. She lived about 18 months after they diagnosed it. And the doctor in the hospital said, "You'll have to go home with hospice." And my mother said, "I'm going home, I don't need hospice." And the doctor said, "You'll have to have it." Well, they called in this lady, and she was talking to my mother. And my mother said, "If I get sick, will you take me to the doctor?" She said, "No, ma'am, Miss Kilpatrick, we'll just give you medicine to make you feel better." My mother said, "Otherwise, you'll just let me die." And so that was the end of that discussion. The girl had no answer. And so maybe some hospices like that, I'd like to think that they have, that they would do a little more than that. But originally, the word hospice was a place where people stay again, like the word hospital. It was just a variation of the word, and it was like where people stay. And it also came from a Latin word that meant exactly that. And then, of course, hospitable. That word also comes from the same root word. And there's others, like host and hostess. All of those words originate from this word here. But they had to do with entertaining people, and not in the way of playing music for them and taking them to a dance or party. Not that kind. The entertaining here. Remember, well, we're going to get to it in a little bit. In Hebrews chapter 13, we're going to see that word used there. But all of these words come from that root word. Alternate English dictionaries say this, however, is no more, they just say friendly, being friendly. That is as far from the Bible meaning of what the word means as we are from Mars. Because it has nothing to do, yeah, sure, you have to be friendly. You're going to be friendly to these people. But see, friendly, just, well, hi, how are you? Pass them in the hall. There's some places I've been where you pass people in the hall and they know you and they don't even speak to you. And so they're very unfriendly, but they were not even close to hospitable. And just saying hi, how you doing, and things like that, that's good gestures, but that's not what the word hospitable means. And we're going to see that as we go through this. This, however, no more captures the biblical meaning than does modern dictionaries capture the New Testament meaning of baptism. Baptize means to dip into water or sprinkle with water, a sign of washing away of sin. This is in the World Book Encyclopedia, Volume 1, page 155. That definition is as far from the biblical definition as it can be, because baptizo means to sink, to immerse, to plunge under. You have to be, and for buried. One of the Greek examples in the story of one of the guys who sailed the oceans, when his ship sank, they used the word baptizo, which told us the ship sank. In other words, the ship baptizo. That's what our word means. The ship sank in the ocean, it's going to go under completely. And so the Bible definition, the word that was originally used for hundreds of years meant to immerse. And then finally they started sprinkling and pouring and calling that baptism. So that's what I'm saying has happened to a lot of our words. Now, I've been in this house right here. It's in Canterbury, England. That is the hospital. That's where the people, the travelers, would come and stay. This house has been there since the 800s. And so it's been there a long, long time. And so over 1,200 years this house has stood. The door there, you go into a little gift shop, and then the rest of the house, and there's a whole lot to the back where they would keep strangers and travelers, and they never charged them for it. It was, they called it an almshouse because it was gratuitous. They didn't charge anything. Okay, this house was established in the 12th century, I said the 800s, by the Archbishop of Canterbury as a place of hospitality to pilgrims. It's called the Eastbridge Hospital. Has operated as an almshouse for the last 400 years. In Chaucer's words, pilgrims from every shire, or we'd call them counties in our terminology, every shire's end of England to Canterbury, they went. The holy, blissful martyr for to seek. They were going there to visit Becket's grave. But that's what a hospital was. It was a place for people to, and usually these were operated by churches. And this one was here, obviously. And here's an illustration from Canterbury Tales, all the pilgrims coming from everywhere going to Canterbury to visit Thomas Becket's grave. Okay, hospitality is sacred. The host must not harm the guest. And now this is from one of the Greek writings. The host must not harm the guest must not harm the host. And not offering in the first place is a serious affront. In ancient Greek, hospitality was called xenia. Now, you've heard the word in the last election cast around, xenophobia. Well, that means you're afraid of strangers. Well, we're not afraid of strangers. But we are afraid of a whole host of people coming in and taking our country over. They're not coming as guests. They're coming to stay. And that's different. But the word xenophilia is the Greek word that means hospitality. And so Zeus, the head god of the Greeks, was responsible. He was the god of hospitality. And in his function as a god and granter of hospitality and protectors of guests, this comes from the word for stranger. So for that matter does hospitality. Another word from that root is hostel. In England, well, all over Europe, Brenda and I and her son Alex spent 2 or 3 nights in a hostel in Basel, not Basel, but St. Gallen, Switzerland. and that's another place just for guests and travelers. A lot of our young people that travel Europe, they stay from one of those to the other. They know where they're all at. But that's what hostel comes from, that word, which means hospitality, which helps to explain why the rules are so severe. In other words, the Greeks, if they broke these rules, it was a penalty. They became outcasts. Whoever did that became outcast to society. Menelaus, another one of the Greeks. I'm showing you what different countries in the world thought of hospitality, not just the biblical view, but the biblical view, and these are basically the same. Menelaus says, there are some strangers come here, 2 men who look like sons of Zeus. What are we to do? Shall we take their horses out, or tell them to find friends elsewhere as they best can? Menelaus, the man who this young man was talking to, was very angry and said, Eteanus, son of Boethius, you never used to be a fool, but now you talk like a simpleton. Take their horses out to course, and show the strangers in that they may have supper. You and I have stayed often at other people's houses before we got back here, where heaven grant that we may rest in peace henceforward. This is from the Odyssey. All of you know something about the Odyssey. So this is how the Greeks looked upon hospitality. We used to do campaigns at Heritage. Well, it was IBC then. And I've stayed in people's houses from South Carolina all the way to the western tip of Oklahoma, that little narrow strip they call the Panhandle that runs out over the top of Texas and just under Kansas. I've stayed there in other people's houses. And then in the eastern part of Oklahoma and Mississippi and Georgia, all over the United States where we've conducted campaigns, I usually stayed in somebody's house. I was their guest. And that's what this man is talking about. He said, we've stayed in other people's houses, let's treat them the same. Because he was afraid that Zeus, the head god, would be angry with them. Okay, here's the verse I talked about. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 2. Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now, you think back to Abraham. When he saw those 3 men coming across the desert, he didn't know who they were, but he started preparing, making ready for those people. He was going to invite them in, and he was going to feed them, and he did. And apparently they spent the night there. And then later 2 of these 3 go on to Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's where Lot encounters them in Genesis chapter 19. And he's sitting at the city gate, and he invites them into his house. And under the law of hospitality, you take care of the guest. Brenda and I have had all kinds of people come to our house during those workshops. See, we go on campaigns, we'd stay with other people. People would come here for workshops, they'd stay with us. Brenda and I one night was literally overrun with people in the house because we had the folks that we were assigned as guests, they were there. And then 2 of my former students who were working together in Panama shows up with their wives and children. They need a place just for the night. We didn't have any more beds, so they slept on the floors. It wasn't safe to walk through the south end of our house because there were so many people in the floors back there. But you know what? That was a fun time because we had done something to help those people that were traveling and needed help. Let me tell you a little story. And it's true also. Up in Ohio, back in the 1840s, there was a young man traveling from one place to another, and darkness came upon him, and he stopped at this farmhouse and asked the man, could he spend the night? Well, the man said, I've got a lot of guests here already. There's no more beds. But I've got a hay loft that's got a lot of hay. You can make a bed up there and sleep. So the young man goes to the barn, gets up in the loft, and sleeps. A few days later, the farmer was up there and he noticed carved into one of the logs that helped brace the barn, USG. He didn't think any more about that. But then, after the Civil War, and Ulysses S. Grant was elected president, the man says, now I know who that guy was, because he had heard of the Grants living some distance away. And it was Ulysses S. Grant that had slept in his barn. And so here's a man that entertained a future president, had no idea about it. But the idea here, be not forgetful to entertain strangers, thereby some have entertained angels. Otherwise, we don't really know who we're entertaining, who we have as guests. In Genesis 18, I've mentioned it, but we're going to go back and look at it now. And I want to make sure that we get to cover this. The whole chapter. Abraham's reaction to the strangers. In Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, because of Abraham's hospitality, God rewards him with good news. It's on this visit when he's told that he's going to have a son. And there's another thing here, brothers and sisters. You notice that in that story, two men left Abraham's house and went to Sodom. And then it says that Abraham continued talking to God. That tells me that third stranger, God had taken on the form of human, or there's a word for that, a big old long word I can't even spell, but it's called Anthropomorphism. Other words, taking the form of man. And, let me just turn and read it. Or, better still, let me just pull it up right here on eSword. That's my go-to when I need scripture fast. It's not working so fast, Lisa. Okay, it'll come up here in a minute. Now then, let's go back to Genesis 18, and I'll show you what we're talking about. Okay, well, it was already at Genesis 18. I didn't know I was going there. I may have used it not long ago. Okay, let's see. Let's get down here to okay, I want to drop in on verse 18. This is God talking to those other two men. For I know him that he will command, talking about Abraham, he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, so to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of him. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry which is come upon me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom. And how many arrived in Sodom? 2. And so that's what I want us to remember. So it says, and the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. That's why I think that the Lord had taken on the shape, he would do that sometimes, take on the shape of man. And when it said no man has seen the face of God, it's talking about God in his natural, his real way. That's why even Moses could not be allowed to look upon him. Because who knows? I mean, God could have brought Moses back to life, but God was making a point that I'm so much higher and superior than mankind, and you don't need to know. But here, God had a purpose. And it says that Abraham continued to commune with the Lord. And then you remember from this, Abraham was asking God, well, if we can find 50, would you save? If we could find 45, would you save the city? And he gets down to 10. He didn't ask God to go any lower. Abraham stopped asking, by the way, and so he couldn't find 10 men, and so the city was burned, as we know. Well, you see, and this is an old mosaic from one of the early church buildings that's still standing in Turkey, but at one time it was a Christian building. And this is supposed to be Abraham entertaining the 3 strangers that came in. And you know that he killed a calf and roasted it, and he made bread, and he just, in other words, he was hospitable to them. So that was Abraham. Okay, the gods visit us disguised as strangers. This is from Homer in the Odyssey again. He's still talking about people visiting people. And he says, gods visit us disguised as strangers. Well, that sort of happened to Abraham back there in Genesis chapter 18. Okay, and this is a Greek picture of some stranger who's come through. Maybe it's the soldier, I don't know, or maybe it's the man that's sitting there. But they've invited him in, and they're taking care of him. Homer explains that they did not even ask them their name or when they were from or where they were from until the host had provided for the guests' physical needs and comfort. So that was the Greeks. Okay, the Arabs. I am the servant of the guest as long as he stays with me, but there's nothing else of the servant about me. In other words, I'm serving him because it's expected of me, because that's what we do. But he said, beyond this, there's nothing of a servant about me. This is in Hamasa, book 3, and page 431. And it's also repeated in book 4 in page 724. So here's an early painting of a Greek setting or early Christian setting of hospitality. And so, and here's another one. You've got a fellow that's sitting over there. He looks sort of bedraggled or something, and looks like he's hungry. And there's a guy coming in the door back there. He's got a bowl of something, and the lady apparently is asking him what she's got his coat. And this other fellow just sitting over there observing, I guess. But that's another painting of hospitality. Matthew 25. My question, brothers and sisters, so many people say that that's just custom. What they did in the Bible was just custom. But has God ever held us responsible for not doing a custom?
1 John 3:17 says, if you see a brother that's in need and do not help him, then where is your love?
Yeah, exactly. You see, God, He condemns binding customs on people. But here's where we're going with this. Matthew chapter 25, verse 35. For I was hungry, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, in everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in, naked, and you clothed me not, sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee hungry, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not unto me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous unto life eternal. I'm trying to remember who came out with this, but around Christmas time, there's a little, it's not a song, it's sort of a recitation. And it's about the fellow that was expecting God was going to come and visit him. And, you know, early in the morning, maybe a beggar, or maybe as a little child. Anyway, there were 3 times somebody that came that needed something, and he said, go away, I'm expecting a guest. And then at the end of the day, he says, Lord, you said you would come and visit me. And the answer was, I came 3 times, and you turned me away. You see, that sort of goes along with this theme here. When you did it to somebody else, you did it to me. If you did the good thing, it was to me. If you did the bad thing, it was to me. The reason I said God is not going to judge us, brothers and sisters, on custom. This was hospitality. I'm not saying that we have to just take every single body that comes along into our house, but I am saying that we need to have some way to entertain people, to have them into our houses, because that's what hospitality is. Now let me go a little further here. That's just a artist's conception of what the judgment may be, the left and the right. Okay, little in Scott. This is a Greek lexicon. The word means guest or friends, applied to persons or parties giving and receiving hospitality, mostly of guests. Strangers especially, wanderers, refugees, under the protection of Zeus, according to the Greek custom. Generally, stranger, foreigner, received into homes. The word Paul uses is philoxenos, and that comes, xenos means stranger. That's literally what it is. And philo, and I should have, well, that little funny looking letter there at the beginning in the parentheses, that's PH. And so it's pronounced philo or philo, we'd say. That means love, the love of strangers. Lover of strangers, literally, comes from the word that means stranger, xenos. In Homer, he divided the nations into savages who despised law and those who were hospitable and feared God. This is also in the Odyssey. So he considered anybody that was not hospitable a savage. Persians, this is from the Farsis, Persian Farsis. That was a group of people in Persia. Hospitality to the man who comes from far or near or far is a criterion for the eternal destiny of the soul. This is in Kittle's Theological Dictionary. And so you see, that was a serious thing. And here is somebody obviously is traveling, and some folks here gathered around, and it's assumed that they're getting ready to take this stranger in. Okay, Genesis 19, Lot's reaction to strangers. He brought them into his house. In verses 1 through 3, and verses 4 through 10, he protects them. And then Lot is rescued, verses 11 through 22. And you know the story there, how that Lot shut the door, and the people, they were really messed up in homosexuality is what it was. And they were trying to get these male figures out and do whatever they wanted to do. And Lot wouldn't do this. He wouldn't allow it. But because of this, they were so evil, God burned up 4 of the 5 cities and would have burned the 5th one up, but Lot begged God to save it. It was a smaller town, and asked him to save it so he'd have a place to run to for refuge. And so here's the men of Sodom trying to get at the angels, and Lot's standing between them trying to protect them. And then in Judges, this is a really odd story, brothers and sisters. Here in the book of Judges, you have the tribe of Benjamin. And here's a fellow that has a Levite who is one of the travelers. You know, the Levites were the priestly tribe. They come into the city, verses 1 through 15 in Judges chapter 19. And they're taken in by an old man. He's of the tribe of Benjamin. In verses 16 through 21, he brings them in. And then verses 22 through 30, the city, just like Sodom, it's just almost a repeat of what happened at Sodom. They want to take this man. They're as evil as the Sodomites and all of those folks. And finally, the old man puts this concubine out, and they kill her with what they were trying to do. And so God, well, finally, I don't know if it was the Levite or if it was the Benjamite, they cut this woman up into 12 pieces and sent a piece of her to each of the 12 tribes. This angered the other tribes against the tribe of Benjamin, and they nearly destroyed the tribe of Benjamin. It got to the point that there weren't even enough women left for the wives of the men that were spared. And God works out a deal so that they can go and get a wife. But you see, even God's own people, one of the tribes of his own people, became so wicked because of a city that broke that hospitality rule, because it was expected if you were in the house, you'd be safe. So God held the whole city responsible for this breach of hospitality. And then in the 23rd Psalm, David portrays himself running from his enemies. And he has become as a foreigner or a stranger. He was taken into God's house and his needs attended in the very presence of his enemies because they could not touch him. You know, David said, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." And he goes on to say, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," because God had taken him in to protect him forever. We don't have to take somebody in to protect them and support them forever. But the idea is that we need to be hospitable. He says he will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is verse 6. Safe from the enemies without. In Pharisee religion, hospitality to the man who comes from, this is Farsi, not Pharisee, who comes from near or far is criterion for the eternal destiny of the soul. Acts 10:23, Peter lodges with the servants, or he lodges rather, the servants of Cornelius. Now these folks, if they're servants of Cornelius, they're probably Roman soldiers. But Peter takes them in and lodges them. This was hospitality demonstrated. Then in Acts 28 and verse 7, Publius practices Roman hospitality with Paul. You notice Roman hospitality is same as Jewish hospitality, same as Greek hospitality, same as the Persian hospitality. That was not just a custom, brothers and sisters. That was a way, they even talk about it was expected of them. They thought there was something religious behind it. The Romans feared Jupiter because he was their chief god. He was the one that pertained to hospitality. And so the Romans didn't want to offend Jupiter. The Greeks didn't want to offend Zeus. I don't know who the Persians didn't want to offend, but we know who the Jews, if they offended some god, it was the God of heaven. And so the idea is that it was a religious thing. It was not a custom, it was religion. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 2. A bishop must be given. You know what that word given literally means? The word addicted comes from this very same word. When it says that an elder is not to be given to wine, he's not to be addicted to wine. And so here you have the idea that the elder has to be given to hospitality, addicted to hospitality. He is not qualified to be a bishop. If he is not, if he is not qualified to be a bishop if he refuses this kind of hospitality. That is what the Bible says. And then in Titus 1 and verse 8, Paul repeats his qualifications to Titus. Failure to have the qualification of being given to hospitality still disqualifies one from being a bishop or an elder. So you see, brothers and sisters, all through the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, and even when Jesus talks about the future judgment, it all revolves around hospitality. You see, in that judgment scene, Jesus didn't say when they were standing there, well, you were baptized for remission of sins, and you weren't, so you get on the left. What he talked about was acts of hospitality. He said, I was sick, and you didn't visit me. I was in jail, you didn't visit me. I was naked, you didn't get me clothes. I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, you didn't give me any water. So you see, it all centered around acts of hospitality. And so to me, that weighs heavy in my mind that he didn't talk about doctrine. He talked about acts of hospitality. That was the judgment scene in Matthew 25. Okay, 3 John chapter 5 verse 10. Beloved, thou dost faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers. This is in verse 5. But in verse 9, I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. Diotrephes wasn't hospitable. So notice what John says. Wherefore, or because of this, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbid them that would, and casteth them out of the church. So you have Gaius and Diotrephes, they're contrasted. When Paul writes to Philemon, Paul is writing to a man, and he says, prepare. Paul thought he was going to get out of prison, and maybe he did. He was in and out of prison 2 or 3 times before he was killed. But he said, prepare a place for me because I'm coming. There were a lot of folks in years past, probably some of you older sisters here have had preachers, the visiting preacher in your house. Maybe he stayed with your household the whole time he was preaching for that congregation, and on his preaching tour. And I know up in Kentucky, one of my old friends that's been dead many, many years, Brother Morgan, Hatler Morgan, he had a little room attached to his house, and he called it Preacher's Corner. And Brother Basil Overton told me, he says, I've spent several times on preaching tours. I've stayed at Hatler Morgan's house in that room. Well, Brenda and I stayed in it one time when we were visiting. And so Brother Morgan was prepared for those. Gaius receives guests, but Diotrephes cast them out. Okay, the summary. Publius practiced hospitality. Elders and bishops are to be given to hospitality, lovers of hospitality. Peter says one should not practice hospitality grudgingly. Gaius practiced hospitality. Diotrephes did not practice hospitality, and John said he would deal with him when he got there. And finally, Jesus says those who do not receive strangers That's what you can combine from Matthew 25, verses 31 to 46, will have their part in the lake that burns with fire. So if we absolutely refuse somebody who really needed our help, in that case, it would be bad. This is the word, philoxenos, means hospitality. Why would people change the meaning of that word when baptizo, which means immersion, we would not dare change that? But they're both Greek words in the New Testament. Why would we change one and not change them both? You see, we maybe sometimes we pick and choose. Maybe we've been misinformed. But hospitality is more than just a custom, brothers and sisters. And there's ways that we can practice it and still not be outrageous. Okay, any questions, any comments? Brother Hubert.
In the movie, Mark, lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell was the only surviving SEAL member that was killed on a mission
Yeah.
in Afghanistan, and he was wounded several times and was about to die, and two little boys from this village saw him and reported it back to the elders in the village, and they were going to just ignore him because they knew the Taliban was after him. But the chief elder said, no, we were going to bring him in. And then he knew when he did that, he was jeopardizing the entire village.
Yeah.
He took him in anyway. And they had to face up to the Taliban.
Yeah. And that's what hospitality was in that part of the world. And that's why I say I don't think Jesus would judge us on a custom. I think he would judge us on something he expected.
Got a question?
Yes, sir.
What are we going to do about these illegal immigrants that are coming into the country?
They're not coming here to be guests. They're coming here to stay.
Okay.
I don't know of one that's planning on coming here and just staying for a while and then going back to his country. They're getting out of that country. I hope I didn't. I hope y'all could hear me. I forgot to pull that thing back. See, it's COVID working on me. It's not old age, it's just COVID. Yeah, and some of them even took advantage of them when they were in bad situations, took advantage of them even, especially the widows and orphans. The widows, then, which was a custom, the men, could own property, but women technically couldn't own property. And if the husband dies and there's no other male family member close, some fella who wanted the land could lay claim to it. And that's one of the things that, so they mistreated them that way by taking away what they had and then just turning them out to live like animals. And you can see why God would get angry over that. Yeah.
The United States is doing it. You made the point that you got to be careful when people take advantage of it because how far should you go with that? So
Yeah.
I guess that's just that we got to prove trust to God.
God doesn't expect us to, to take people into a house that we know are coming there for, the wrong purpose. The people that traveled back then, it was a mutual respect. The people that were staying somewhere would, they respected the host as well as the host respected that person's rights.
They got a purpose in that when it's traveling instead of just vagabond.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories my dad used to say or tell, when he was a little boy, they lived at Moulton. And of course, you know, there's a whole bunch of Terrys that live over there. And this one traveler had been told, apparently some of the Terrys, some families were pretty bad, had a bad reputation. Somebody told this traveling salesman, said, when you get into that area, don't stay with any Terrys. And so the guy, you know, he would go from house to house, and he would ask the people, you know, what their name was, and they'd say, I'm so and such Terry. Finally, he gets to a house, and the man's name is Guest, but you know how people pronounce. The old timers would say Guest. I remember when we have a bunch of Guesties living out at Guest Town, out from Green Hill. Well, this old fella said, what's your name? And he said, Guess. And he said, I guess you're another one of them Terrys. So you have to be careful where you stay. Lisa, you got to remind me, where is it you're going to?
It's the Italian place where the old Pizza Hut was. I don't know how to say the name. It starts with a B. Italian?
You know where Pizza Hut used to be over there near Hobby Lobby? That's the place. We just don't know what to call it. So anybody that wants to go and eat there, that's where we're going. Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow morning.
Oh, it's tomorrow morning, not tomorrow night. That's too late.
10:30.
Okay, and what, the ladies, what do you call it? It's got a name?
Well, they're gonna do a service project. Everybody bring a sandwich, we'll eat, and then do a service project.
Okay, so ladies that want to, what time in the morning?
10:30.
10:30. The ladies that want to, you bring a sandwich or something to eat, and then gonna do a project, something that can help maybe some folks, I assume, or maybe it's something about doing something here. But there'll be ladies that'll be meeting at 10:30 in this building. Where at in this building?
In the annex.
In the annex, okay. So that other auditorium. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Okay, if not, Brother Ronnie, would you lead us in a closing prayer?
Heavenly Father, we be thankful for this year of study. Thankful for the ones who are attending today. We have a good number. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you bless us in a way that we can absorb this wonderful lesson on hospitality today, that we'll surely and most often recognize the opportunities that we can be hospitable, take advantage of it, let it be a way of life on an everyday basis, that we can express our love and our fellowship with fellow man and even those who are guests traveling through. Pray that you continue being with those who are not well, those who are receiving medicines, those who are receiving treatments. Pray that they will be most beneficial at that particular time. We pray that you be with the congregation as a whole here, will be the congregation that wants to be leaders in the near future that will serve well. And pray, Heavenly Father, be with us in this decision making. Thankful for Brother Randy, his ability to teach and to preach, and continue to be with him. Pray, Heavenly Father, as we go through life, that we'll always put you first. Forgive us when we sin in Christ's name. Amen.
Before we leave, let me make this statement. I meant to say hospitality can extend beyond the house, the physical house. Remember the Good Samaritan? Remember the story? Remember what he did for this man that he had no idea who he was. But he made arrangements to take care of that man. He did something for that man to help him and may have saved his life. And that was an act of hospitality. It just wasn't performed in the home. And many of us have done things like that. We found found somebody in need. We've done something for them. It extends beyond just the confines of our own home. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's just in the house. But it's more than shaking hands and saying, we're glad you're here, and saying, how you doing? Hospitality is a whole lot different than